So welcome back to our channel. Today I am actually going to discuss regarding the second part of our lecture series on physiology of deglutition, that is the path of food from bite to stomach. And here in this second part we will be discussing regarding the pharyngeal phase of deglutition. Without wasting time, let us get started. So pharyngeal phase is the second phase in the physiology of deglutition, wherein the food which has now reached the pharynx from the oral cavity via the oral phase, which was being discussed in our previous video, is to reach the esophagus now by the action of those pharyngeal muscles. So to start with the pharyngeal phase, we will start with the diagram. So to start with the pharyngeal phase, firstly we have to understand this diagram, wherein these muscles are nothing but the tensor veli palatini and levator veli palatini muscles. So this is the tensor veli palatini and the levator veli palatini muscles. Whereas this is the outer longitudinal muscle layer of pharynx, okay, which is consisting of three main muscles, and they are the stylopharyngeus, the salpingopharyngeus, salpingopharyngeus, and the palatopharyngeus muscles. Palatopharyngeus muscles. The stylopharyngeus muscle is being supplied by the cranial nerve line, whereas the other two muscles are being supplied by cranial nerve. Good. Now what happens? This is about the outer longitudinal layer of the pharyngeal muscles, whereas these are your inner circular layers. So these are inner circular muscle layer, pharyngeal constrictors, correct? And they are actually three constrictors over here: superior constrictor, middle constrictor, and the inferior constrictor muscle. So you have superior, middle, and inferior constrictor muscles. And very importantly, now you have got another two muscles in the esophagus which are actually controlling, okay? And that is nothing but this one. It is the upper esophageal sphincter and this inferior constrictor muscle has got a part, I think you know, and that is the CRICOPHARYNGEUS muscle. That so you have got this CRICOPHARYNGEUS muscle here. Now this is the part of the stomach. This is the stomach. No doubt, I think. This is the part of the esophagus thing, and this is the part of the lower esophageal sphincter. Take. This is the tracheobronchial tracing. Obviously, my important points are in here only. One is the part of the epiglottis. And the other one is actually here. Let me demonstrate it with another color so that you can see. And that is correct. So these are the vocal cords. That is vocal cord, correct? So along with them, also two muscles helping in this way, face, correct? Which is, let us draw them also. One is, both of them are actually hearing this pushing. This one is, this is the another message. Good. So these are the two muscles being seen, and these are actually not two. It's actually that suprahyoid muscles. Suprahyoid muscles. Right? No. Suprahyoid muscles. Now, I need to now start with this pharyngeal phase. Obviously, primarily what happens is that the bolus, which was being formed actually by the bolus formed in oral cavity in oral phase is now touching the palatoglossal arch, that is, I think you know, anterior pillar, the tonsils in the tonsillar fossa, as well as the posterior pillar, that is the palatopharyngeal arch. I think you will agree with me. That is the posterior pillar as well as the posterior pharyngeal pillar. So what happens? These sites. So this is your bolus. Correct? This bolus will now be touching the area of tonsillar fossa, posterior pharyngeal wall, the anterior pillar and the posterior pillar, and then these various sites are being supplied by the glossopharyngeal nerve. So obviously this will stimulate the pharyngeal nerve line. Correct? So what happens is that the glossopharyngeal nerve is being stimulated. So from here, no problem, we have got the glossopharyngeal nerve endings. In this glossopharyngeal nerve ending will be branching up to the there's very nucleus situated in the brainstem, and that is nothing but the nucleus ambiguous. Okay. Now this nucleus ambiguous, so this will now in turn stimulate the nucleus ambiguous. So this nucleus ambiguous is the nucleus of the 10th cranial nerve. So the 10th cranial nerve is being stimulated, which is supplying the levator valli palatini muscle. So this is being supplied by the cranial nerve 10. Correct? So obviously this very nucleus ambiguous is being stimulated, so obviously cranial nerve 10, that is the vagus nerve, will be stimulated, and on stimulation of cranial nerve 10, obviously this will stimulate the levator valli palatini muscle. So what does it do? Obviously it will cause the elevation of the soft palate. So this will cause elevation of the soft palate. So the soft palate is elevated, or you may say it can be pulled up. Correct? Whereas the cranial nerve 10 itself supplies the palate, so it also supplies the palate, so that it will also cause palatal contraction. So this will cause palatal contraction. So by means of palatal contraction, again this uvula will be pulled up. So the uvula is also pulled up. Okay. So what happens? The uvula is pulled up, the soft palate is pulled up. Obviously this will in together prevent the food now enter the nasopharynx. Okay. So what happens? The root entry into the nasopharynx is prevented by the action of the 10th cranial nerve being stimulated by the nucleus ambiguous being stimulated by the 9th cranial nerve, which happens actually to prevent the food entry into the nasopharynx. Correct? So the short pulp is pulled up as well as the uvula is pulled up. Correct? But also, not only because of the soft palate and uvula getting pulled up because of the action of the 10th cranial nerve, but also the soft palate has to be tensed enough to get pulled up. So the tensor villi palatini muscle also acts in here, and this tensor villi palatini is actually being supplied by the 5th cranial nerve, which is also being stimulated by the action. Correct? So that is the actually the 5th cranial nerve is actually there to stimulate this tensor villi palatini because of this action. So here is also another nucleus, and that is nothing but your cranial nerve 5. And this trigeminal nerve is actually supplying this tensor villi palatini muscle, which causes tensing of this palatine in short palate. So to help in pulling up the soft palate, which is being done by the 10th cranial. Correct? So obviously this will add on to the effect of soft palate getting pulled up to prevent food entry into the nasopharynx. The first entry point from our parents is prevented. Now what happens? Obviously this bolus has only one pathway to go, has only one part to go, correct? And that is nothing but your esophagus, and esophagus, correct? So you see, this has to go in here. This has to go in here. But the entry into the nasopharynx has to be prevented. The entry into the larynx also is to be prevented. Correct? So you need to know about how the larynx entry is prevented. Let us start with the larynx part now. So then these true vocal cords, what happened to them? These true vocal cords, what happened to them? Obviously, they adapt. Already the 10th cranial nerve is stimulated. So the 10th cranial nerve is stimulated. The lateral cricopharinger muscles and the oblique arytenoids are, and the transverse and oblique arytenoids are doing that together to cause adduction of the vocal cords. So adapt by the action of three muscles: lateral, cricopharinger, and transverse oblique arytenoids. Right? So this is the first part. Next one also is the epiglottis. So what is being done to the epiglottis? The epiglottis is getting retroverted. So retroversal occurs by action of epiglotticus, and thus the epiglottis is getting retroverted once it is getting closing the lines, as well as the vocal cords are getting adducted so to prevent aspiration, and thus the food entry into the larynx is also unwanted. So it will prevent the food to enter the larynx. Correct? Now you have to know how does the food just getting entered into the esophagus. Correct? How does it get? So you know at this moment longitudinal muscles and the outer longitudinal muscle layer and the inner circular muscle layer. So what happens? These outer longitudinal muscles actually helping elevating. So they will elevate the pharynx as well as larynx. So they will elevate the pharynx and larynx. Pharynx and larynx. So the larynx as well as the pharynx is getting elevated by the action of the outer longitudinal layer. Then this inner circular muscle layer, that is the pharyngeal constrictors, actually obviously are responsible for pharyngeal peristalsis. Pharyngeal peristalsis, correct? As well as the suprahyoid muscles. What does they do? They will actually elevate the larynx. So larynx is getting elevated and is moved anteriorly by the action of these suprahyoid muscles. So what happens? The larynx is getting elevated and moving anteriorly so that the constriction effect on the esophagus on the part of the pharynx is getting reduced. Correct? So to facilitate food moving into the esophagus from the pharynx. So what happens? The pharyngeal peristalsis by means of inner circular muscle layer, the longitudinal outer longitudinal muscle layer is causing elevation of the larynx and as well as the pharynx. The suprahyoid muscles also elevating the larynx as well as moving it anteriorly. So these all muscles action is actually causing the bolus to go inside the pharynx. So these all actions are actually causing, so we know now at this moment. So obviously what happens, all of them are actually causing in together the bolus to reaching the pharynx from the mouth. Correct? Now what happens? The last one, you know, the CRICOPHARYNGEUS muscle. What are they doing? This the CRICOPHARYNGEUS muscle forms the upper esophageal sphincter. So this is forming the upper esophageal sphincter. So this will overlaps and makes the bolus to move into the esophagus. So you know at this moment, lastly, obviously, the bolus to reach into the esophagus we need the relaxation of the relaxation of CRICOPHARYNGEUS muscle, which is nothing but following the upper esophageal sphincter. Correct? So that's all regarding today's part on the pharyngeal phase of deglutition. So today we have actually discussed regarding the second phase, that is the pharyngeal phase of the deglutition, and how does the food, that is the bolus being found in the oral cavity, is reaching the esophagus from the pharynx. In our previous video, we had actually discussed regarding the oral phase of the deglutition, and in our next video on this series, we will be describing about the esophageal phase of the deglutition, in which the food, that is the bolus, will reach the stomach from the esophagus. Thank you very much for your kind listening.